seventh grade. It is last day of August. We've made it almost through the entire first month, which is not something that everybody expected, but here we are. Most of you have done a really good job. I have graded everybody's test who turned one in, and you should be able to check your scores in Google Classroom. Most of you did pretty well, so good job on that. You will have this, of course, this video to watch today. You will have just the one attendance question, which I'll make up here in a little bit to answer. I'll send a Google form. Though the reason I switched over to Google form is to help me keep records straight. You'll just have to answer one simple question, and B, just to keep your answers private in case I'm asking you something like last week where I'm asking how you feel about the test. I don't want anybody to feel like they have to say, I feel like I'm going to fail the test in front of everybody. I feel I'd rather have you be able to just talk to me individually and me be able to reach out and help you that way. Some people, though, have not turned in anything. And like I've mentioned a few times, if you are not doing any of this, you're not only getting zeros on your midterms, but you're being marked absent for school. None of this is optional. This is not whenever you feel like it. This is stuff that needs to be done the day, just like if you were in school. I'm not giving any homework. The questions I give out, the kids are doing in class. And so you need to do yours on those days too. Like I said, today's not one of those days. Today is a notebook. Don't forget, you need to write these notes down. Okay. I know that you can see the notes and you feel like maybe I don't need to just copy them down, but you do for a couple of reasons. Number one is at the end of the 9 weeks in October, I will have you bring those into me during that last week, and I'll grade them, which is the part you care about. But the other part is that studies show that you learn like only 40% of what you read, but you remember closer to 70% of what you write down. Just like when I go to the grocery store, if I write down a list and then I forget the list at home, I'm still more likely to remember that because I wrote it down than if I just left it at home anyway, which I would because I'm an idiot. But anyway, so we're talking about Europeans coming into America today. And so like I said, don't forget, you need to start your next chapter 2, section 1 at the top of a new page. I'm going to start, hopefully, these videos I've tried to keep pretty short. We're about 3 minutes into this one. I'm trying to keep them to under 20, whereas class is 45 minutes. But what I'm going to start doing, hopefully by the end of this chapter, is just recording YouTube live while I do my first 7th grade class, which is 4th hour. That does not mean you'll have to be there to watch them at that time. That just because when YouTube Live uploads, it shows just like a regular YouTube video. It just is going to give you the option to be there actually in class, like you were in school, instead of watching just my weird floating head in the corner. You can see the whole classroom, and it also allows me to not do this, one extra time like I am right now teaching this. There are selfish reasons for me to try to do that too, but I'm working on getting a microphone and streaming YouTube Live from actual class. Some of you mentioned that YouTube video I sent on Friday, which again was not me. Some of you said it didn't work. It's no big deal if it didn't. But it's John Green. It's called Crash Course U.S. History. That was the first one, number 1. So if you want to search that on YouTube, if you want to watch that, he's a popular author. He wrote The Fault in Our Stars, which is a very popular young adult novel. Maybe some of you have read. And he's he talks really fast, but he's a pretty well liked. And those videos are just between 10 and 15 minutes. So if you're interested in the stuff back in chapter 1 and a lot of stuff we're talking about in chapter 2, go right ahead. So today we're talking about Europeans getting here. We're talking about what happened today, not today, but today we're talking about what happened back then to make Europeans start to spread out from, Europe. That's where they have to leave from. Okay. And so the people of Western Europe were isolated from the rest of the world. They were basically a theocracy, which is a word from chapter 1, just like the Mayans, the Aztecs, the Incans. They are a society run by religion. Their religion, some of you may have heard of, some of you may be one of these, Catholic. Their whole civilization, Western Europe, we're talking Italy, we're talking France, we're talking Portugal, talking Spain. And you can Google Maps and look at those places if you want. They were dominated by the Catholic Church. The Pope, who is the head of the Catholic Church, he is in charge of basically everything. Not just the Catholic Church, which is still the case today, but he basically served as whatever you want to call it, king or president or prime minister of all those different countries also, because again, they were basically a theocracy, maybe not to the extent that the Mayans and the Incans were, where you had a guy going up to the top of the pyramid and demanding gold tributes or whatever. But still, the church was really intertwined with government in a way that we aren't now. In America, one of the key aspects of America is the First Amendment, which gives you the right to worship how you want without being bothered by the government. And so if you are a Catholic, you could be a Catholic, but if you're a Baptist or a Muslim or a Buddhist or a atheist or a snake charmer, the government cannot punish you. And that's one of the key aspects of America. But it wasn't like that back then, especially in Europe. And America, of course, wasn't America yet. We were just a scattered land of Native American tribes, which we talked about in the last chapter. And so Catholicism, or being Catholic, is the main deal in Western Europe, but in the Middle East, parts of Asia and Northern Africa, Islam is starting to spread. And so those two religions are going to come into conflict. And so European Christians, Catholics, become fearful of losing access to the Holy Land, which we now call Israel. And so we launched the Crusades. The Crusades in college, you would have whole classes on Crusades. It's a very world-altering and important changing events. But basically, these Catholic and Christian forces were going to war and basically saying, hey, you're going to be a Christian now. And then the Muslims are like, no, and make me. And then they would say, well, we're going to make you. And they'd say, well, you in what army? And they'd be like, well, this army, we got an army. And then they would fight a war. And it was a very violent, bloody conflict. And there were several crusades. But again, this is American history. We don't have time to talk about all that. But needless to say, it was not pleasant. But what it did really is start to intermingle these cultures. Once the Catholics, the Western European Christians, moved to the Middle East and Northern Africa, even if they weren't trying to actually permanently move there, they began to interact with these people, and they began to see that other cultures had other things like diamonds and especially spices. Spices were literally, salt was considered currency back then. You could buy something with salt because A, makes food taste not terrible, but also B, they didn't have the big white or steel thing you have in your kitchen, which is a refrigerator. And so it made meat not kill you because it preserved and killed germs and stuff, which is pretty important if you're going to want to eat food, and that's pretty important to them, just like it is you and me now. And so they don't have a refrigerator. They don't have, they can't just make ice or whatever. And so they've got to have spices and specifically salt to preserve their food. And so rich dudes in Europe are like, hey, we want this stuff. That's what rich people do is they, you don't get rich by writing checks. You get rich by getting more things. And so these wealthy Europeans, specifically Italians, like, we want all these. We want perfume, silks, jewels, and specifically spices. And so they start sending caravans to get these. And so once this happens, wealthy Italians, they're starting to read. Rich people, I'm going to ask my class today, what do rich people do? What do they do? And I'll get a lot of different answers. Well, they buy, they buy houses, they travel around the world. They do. And the answer basically that you're going to get to is they do what they want because they don't have to work. And so that's what these Italians are doing. They start trading, and they're able to, with the stuff that they bring back to Europe, they're able to trade for more money, and they begin to get rich. And when they get rich, they don't have to work anymore. And now they can't fire up their Xbox or their PlayStation and play Warzone or whatever, and they can't hop on Snapchat to talk to their friends. So they are reading books. I know that sounds to you like reading books for fun, but yeah, they were reading books to become more knowledgeable. Some of you might read for fun, that's fine, but most of my students are like, I'd rather, hop in Warzone or whatever. So people began to, this became known as the Renaissance. Renaissance is a Latin word that means rebirth. And so basically the idea of science and knowledge and traveling became popular again. People didn't just have to worry about why weren't they popular before is the question I get all the time. Well, it was because you had things like you didn't have wealth. And so what you had is you had plague, and you had starvation, and you had things like that. And so people's main mission in life was like, hey, don't get sick and die, and get enough food to feed our family. And so now that people have wealth and they have leisure time means the time to do whatever you feel like. Like you have after school or whatever, after you're done with your homework or whatever, that's leisure time. Whenever you can play PlayStation or run around outside, or back then they'd push a hoop with the stick down the road for fun. Now we have more fun things. And old people old like me, they're like, well, I didn't play PlayStation when I was a kid, and I didn't play Fortnite or whatever. It's because we didn't have it, and that's why these people didn't. That's why they read books, because that was the only thing that there was to do for fun. But it was also help them to educate themselves about the world, and so they become, there start to be major advances in science, in specifically for our purposes, geography. People start to discover new parts of the world. Didn't have Google Maps back then. You had a lot of the world was literally uncharted. So the population begins to increase because medicine is improving and the bubonic plague is disappearing. And so merchants and bankers, not only, it's nice for me to sit here and say they wanted to know more about the world, which is why they traveled, but they also were trying to make that money. They were trying to find other there's other places, there's other things to be had, there's other things to be had, there's money to be made. And so this is where you get the large nation states. Before then, if you've seen like movies like 300 or whatever, each town was basically its own country. And so, but what you now start having is consolidation of power, and so countries start growing. And so instead of Rome, the one city in Italy, being its own city and country, now you get a whole country of Italy with Rome as the capital, and specifically the Vatican City, which is inside of Rome, which is where the Pope lives and lived back then, which is basically running the whole show. And so now you get, when you consolidate these powers, you have more land. When you have more land, you have more resources. And when you have more resources, you have more money. When you have more money, you could do more things. And these countries start to pay for voyages for people to go places. What places, Mr. Batts? Great question. The answer is they didn't know. That's the whole point. They didn't know where they were going or what they were going to find. And so you get advances in technology. You get cartography, which is a fancy word for map making. Why don't we just call it map making, Mr. Batts? Well, I don't know. You can call it map making. It's fine with me. Astrolabes, those are the things you've seen in before, where you have like one little arm and they have another little arm that goes up, and it measures basically the distance from the horizon as you're looking out to certain stars, and that's help measures where you are, which direction moving, time of day. Magnetic compass, which is important. It always points north, which is that way, the way I'm sitting now. And they had better ships. They were called caravels, which makes people hungry because it reminds them of caramels, which are delicious candy bars. But these are just shallow water sailing boats, which could go faster and which could sail up into creeks and streams and rivers that are not too deep without bottoming out, which is pretty important. And so you also had, south of Europe in Africa, you had powerful African kingdoms that are flourishing. And so the point of this is, as European kingdoms grow and grow and grow, and as the African kingdoms grow and grow and grow, eventually they're going to butt up against each other and cause conflict. And that's the idea behind, the point of learning this. And so Africa is and was very rich with natural resources. When I say we, I mean Europeans, which is where most of us come from, not all of us. You might not have European, ancestry, but most people here do. I do, so I'll say we. Whenever Europeans start discovering parts of Africa, they sail further and further and further down the west coast of Africa, and eventually, as we'll talk about in the later section, all the way around the tip. There's just stuff like gold and rubies everywhere. And so like the Africans, because things are common, they're not worth anything to them. And so the Europeans were giving Africans things like salt for gold. And the Africans, there's this idea that people have that they were like uncivilized. They didn't know better. And they were like, salt, I'll trade the gold for that. And then the Europeans would be like laughing behind their back, like, what suckers? They traded all the salt for gold, but that's not true. The gold was just not worth as much to them because it was everywhere, and it's literally a rock. And so when you're thinking about, and salt is too, to be technical, but you can eat it. But when you're thinking about, for practical living my everyday life purposes, gold is only worth what somebody will pay for it. And in Africa, they're just rocks. But salt, like I said earlier, can preserve food, can make food taste palatable where it's able to be eaten, and can, like I said, uh, kill bacteria to where your food that you've killed and eaten will not kill you back once you eat it. And so there's a good reason why salt was much more valuable to these people. It wasn't because they were dumb. It wasn't because they were stupid. It wasn't because they were uncivilized. It's because it was much, 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 much more useful to them in their everyday lives. So Ghana is the first kingdom that became huge and powerful, and they started to tax traded items. And again, so they were making money from the Europeans that were coming here. Mali is the second one, and again, these are sort of similar to the Aztec, Inca, Maya civilizations in Central and South America. They're a little bit later than most of those, but these are in the the after the year 1000. As you can see here, these are in the 1300s. And so they developed trade routes from across the desert, the Sahara Desert, the biggest desert on Earth. And it's incredible that they were able to travel across that in the year 1300. It's pretty impressive to be able to do that in 2020, but let alone 700 or whatever years ago. And so their capital, Timbuktu, became one of the biggest, largest cities in on planet Earth, let alone just in Africa. And so they began to make their own. They began to have their civilizations, their systems of measurements, and you know, laws and whatever in their government, just like the Aztec, Mayan, Incan did, just like we do here in America, just like civilizations all over in Europe, you know, with Italy and Britain and France and whatever. So before we go on to the next slide, here is your attendance question for the day. So you've watched this video. All you got to do, click on your Google form or Google Classroom. You could just type a one-word answer. What is your favorite sport? Don't have one, just write don't have one. That's fine. If you don't have one, but you don't want to write 3 words, you could just say golf, because it's only 4 letters and you can lie to me. It doesn't matter if you're telling the truth or not. It's just to make sure that you've been paying attention to this video. Okay, so that actually is the last slide. So we're at the end today. So we're 17 minutes in. Again, hopefully pretty soon I will be doing these live on YouTube from the class, and I will still send the notes home as a link. So you're able to, you know, you're not going to have to, I don't expect you to keep up, especially I don't know how well you'll be able to see, you know, the TV if I have the notes up there while we are having class. We'll do our best. Well, I'll attach the notes as just a slideshow, so you're able to see those in full every time, just like I have been now. But I'm going to start doing these live when we're in class. Like I said, you know, part of the reason is because I don't want to do it twice, to be honest. But part of the reason is I'd like for you to feel like you're more involved in our everyday class. But like I said, I'm not worried about, especially if I have my mask on, that you won't be able to hear me as I walk around the room. So I'm going to try to get a microphone or something, and I'm working with the people here on that. So keep your mask on today when you're out of your house. Wash your hands, stay safe, and make sure you answer the attendance question before the end of the day. Okay? Have a great one. Bye.